Hi, my name is Gabriel McKee, and today I'll be presenting part of the work that I defended in my 2020 master's thesis, but that I've not presented publicly till now. Today's paper is titled The Express Meaning of Very Kurt Cobain, a corpus-driven evaluation of proposed cognitive mechanisms. So the subject of this presentation is the express meaning of proper names, specifically individual denoting proper names that occur after a degree adverb in English, as in so Paris, rather Tom, or very Kurt Cobain. There are no known restrictions regarding the type of degree adverb and the type of proper name that can participate in the construction. From a theoretical perspective, these objects are therefore of particular interest because their constituting elements would not be expected to be freely combined a priori based on their respective characteristics. Firstly, the units involved are not classically considered to be syntactically compatible. Traditionally, theories of language have widely accepted what Payne et al. Call the complementarity claim, the assumption that adjectives modify nouns and adverbs, including degree adverbs, modify everything else. Constructions such as very John Lennon seemingly violate this claim, as forms such as John Lennon are usually considered proper names, a noun subtype. Secondly, the semantics of the two types of units involved in the construction are also not obviously compatible. For the purposes of this study, degree adverbs, also known as adverbs of degree and intensive adverbs, will be characterized as units whose meaning consists primarily of a notion of degree. These functional units cannot stand on their own and must be combined with a scale. This is what is known as the scalarity requirement. Degree adverbs therefore collocate very naturally with gradable adjectives, for instance, red, units that encode a gradable scale. Turning to the meaning of proper names, the orthodox view is that proper names have no meaning. They simply refer to a unique entity. Many other positions exist, however. In cognitive linguistics, the framework that will be adopted here, theorists have posited that proper names provide access to a rich array of experience-derived encyclopedic knowledge. Discussing the meaning of George Washington, for instance, Ronald Laniker argues that it does not just refer to a person, but tends to activate a conventional array of encyclopedic knowledge. For instance, the fact that he was an army general, the first American president, had a wife named Martha, etc. Regardless whether one assumes that proper names have meaning or not, no theory posits that these units encode a scale with which a degree adverb can interact. Confronted with this apparent mismatch, linguists have proposed several solutions. However, far from achieving any kind of consensus, the most fleshed out of these models diverge wildly, disagreeing on everything from the semantics of the degree device to the construction's express meaning, a largely theory-free issue. What is more, these models were built on scant evidence, and their claims have not been independently scrutinized. Thus, we have two objectives. Firstly, we will present and compare second-generation models' claims regarding the representations and operations involved in the construction. Secondly, we will evaluate the empirical adequacy of their respective claims against a corpus of authentic usage. The presentation is further subdivided as follows. In the next section, we introduce the existing models proposed in the English language literature. In the methods section, we then explain how we selected our study case, i.e. very Kurt Cobain, and present the corpus method used to analyze the collected data. Key results include the fact that 1, the construction yields far more express meanings than previously thought, and 2, these express meanings cluster with different linguistic features. In our discussion, we show that elements of the existing hypotheses can be usefully employed to model the construction's cognitive mechanisms, but that neither hypothesis considered is empirically adequate. We argue in favor of a previously dismissed cognitive mechanism. So to our knowledge, only 3 studies in the English language literature have truly attempted to identify the cognitive processes and representations involved in the degree adverb plus proper name construction. By processes and representations, we are referring to what are often called the basic components of cognition. Simply put, processes are cognitive operations, for instance, comparison, that operate over representations, information-bearing structures, for instance, nouns. In the case of the present construction, there are 3 representations of interest, namely a degree device, a nominal form, and an expressed meaning. The operation that is of greatest interest to us here is the operation that allows the degree device and the nominal form to interact. For brevity's sake, we're going to focus on only the two most strongly contrasting of the available models, the override hypothesis and the quantificational hypothesis. So Gonzálvez García, the author of this particular hypothesis, proposes that degree adverb plus proper name is a construction in the sense intended by the construction grammar theorist Ariel Goldberg. That is to say, it's a form-meaning pairing, here a syntactic combination, that is stored in the long-term memory in the brain. In construction grammar, constructions can be identified via, amongst other means, idiosyncratic linguistic behavior. According to Gonzálvez García, degree adverb plus proper name counts as a construction in Goldberg's sense of the term, given that a degree adverb is combined with an inherently non-gradable unit, that is to say, a noun. Gonzálvez García is thus implicitly assuming that the degree adverb in So Harry Potter is the same mental representation as the one in So Red. He suggests that the degree adverb targets a well-known gradable property associated with the nominal referent. Thus, for instance, if Timmy is known to have problems by falling over all the time, it's then perfectly acceptable to say, "That's so Tim," as an alternative to "That's so clumsy." Gonzálvez García argues that this gradable property is selected via the process of metonymy. Tim stands in for the notion of clumsiness that is associated with that individual, and thus the notion of clumsiness can be targeted for intensification by the degree adverb and overrides or squashes the notion of Tim. On this account, the nominal form is thus adjectivizing. That is to say, it's developing a stable, gradable property meaning. Sant, on the other hand, builds her quantificational model on two empirical observations. Firstly, she notes that degree adverbs can combine with adjective-fronted NPs without intensifying the otherwise gradable property denoted by the adjective. For instance, in the sentence, "It tastes very red wine," the redness of the wine is not intensified. Rather, the degree device interacts somehow with the entire NP, red wine. Secondly, she notes that the nouns and noun phrases that participate in the construction pass diagnostics for multidimensionality, such as "in every respect" or "except for." That is to say, the nouns and noun phrases possess multiple dimensions. For instance, to qualify as shoes that are like those from the 1990s, the shoes in question must possess multiple properties, color, style, material, etc., that characterize shoes made in that era. So the construction therefore involves the predication of contextually appropriate dimensions. That is to say, the construction serves to express that the subject and the noun are comparable with respect to certain dimensions. In order for this analysis to work on a formal level, Sant has to posit that the degree device involved in the construction is not actually the same degree device found with gradable adjectives, which you'll recall is a device that targets a scale. On her account, the degree device is a quantifier, a unit akin to much or a lot. The degree device quantifies over the NP's discourse-relevant dimensions, conveying the message that the entity, the subject, being characterized possesses a significant number of these dimensions. So these models are derived from different data sets and rest on very different theoretical frameworks, construction grammar and formal semantics, respectively, and thus differences between the positive mechanisms are to be expected to some degree. However, it's important to note that the models make mutually exclusive predictions regarding the construction's expressed meaning, the component that is most directly derived from the theorist's own language experience and on which the models would be expected to concur. An independent investigation into their respective claims is thus clearly required. The method adopted for this study is behavioral profiling. This is an increasingly popular method in corpus-based semantics that is a good choice for exploratory investigation. Behavioral profiling involves compiling a corpus and annotating each data point in a corpus to study relevant features. The annotation process results in detailed qualitative descriptions of each data point. Statistical analyses are then conducted to identify clusters of features. In the present case, we're attempting to identify, firstly, identify expressed meanings generated by the construction, and secondly, to determine whether these expressed meanings cluster with different linguistic features. Since we're investigating an object that has not been studied empirically in depth, we want to achieve probable data saturation. That is to say, the point in the research process when no new information is discovered in the data analysis. Given that we were seeking to achieve data saturation, which is an intensive process, and that any degree adverb and any proper name could participate in the construction, it was necessary to investigate a carefully selected case study that was productive but also chosen without conscious bias. So in a preliminary investigation, we determined that very is the degree adverb that occurs the most frequently in the construction in the corpus of contemporary American English, COCA, the largest publicly available English language corpus. Using COCA, we also determined that individual denoting proper names are the most common type of noun to participate in the construction. However, COCA could not serve as our primary data source, as no individual denoting proper name occurred more than 20 times in this source. Like other studies before us, we therefore turned to web evidence. In a pilot study conducted in early 2018, we determined that Kurt Cobain was the most frequently occurring rock star name plus surname combination to co-occur with very on the social media website Twitter. In turn, rockstar had been found to be the most common type of profession, broadly interpreted, to occur with very in Twitter data compared to 19 other options, including lawyer and movie star. The corpus compiled for this particular study is comprised of 249 unique instances of very Kurt Cobain collected via Twitter and an additional 35 unique instances collected via the Google search engine for a combined total of 284 unique data points. Each data point was annotated for several qualitative and formal features. Each of these features had several levels. We won't go over all of them, but very quickly, for instance, we made note of the lemmatized form of the verb. Note, however, that it was necessary to split the verb feel into distinct senses for reasons that will become clear shortly. Another feature we annotated, the qualitative one, that we annotated for was the ontological type of the subject using the well-known Dolce ontology. According to Dolce, for instance, animate subjects are agentive physical objects, whereas things like songs or famous quotes are social objects. There's an entire inventory here. Our empirical analysis yielded two important observations. The first of these observations is that the construction is involved in no less than 5 express meanings, namely comparison, inclination, quantification, typicality, and loyalty. Examples of each follow. Comparison expresses that X, the subject, is reminiscent or comparable to N, Kurt Cobain, in some way. In the following, for instance, the sunglasses in question are said to be reminiscent of those worn by Cobain. Virtually any well-known piece of information associated with Cobain can be evoked in this manner. For instance, his long blonde hair, the fact that he had messy hair, the fact that he suffered from suicidal ideation, his singing voice, the types of lyrics that he wrote, the type of clothing that he wore, etc. Quantification expresses that X is comprised or made up of things associated with N. For instance, in this tweet, the day in question involves singing a well-known Kurt Cobain song and wearing plaid, clothing with which he's strongly associated. Inclination expresses that X has a desire for N or something associated with N. Given that Cobain was a well-known musician, instances in our data set usually express a desire to listen to his music. And it's worth noting here that these are the types of instances that justified splitting feel into different senses. Here, of course, we're dealing with a desire sense of feel. Typicality expresses that X is associated with or characteristic of N. It's worth noting that these cases usually involve a generic subject. If the subject were specific in the example shown here, a comparison statement would be produced. This flannel shirt is very Kurt Cobain, i.e. comparable to something he actually wore. Loyalty, the last and my personal favorite, expresses that X is loyal to N. In the example seen here, the speaker is expressing disappointment or frustration in their inability to attend the premiere of a documentary on Kurt Cobain's life. Showing up to such events might be expected of loyal fans, or loyal fans might expect this behavior of themselves and each other. So failing to show up to the documentary's premiere, that is to say, to engage in the fandom's participatory culture, could be interpreted as a lack of loyalty towards the rock icon. The second important observation that we made is that multiple correspondence analysis, the statistical method that we employed, confirms that 3 of these expressed meanings cluster with fairly distinct sets of linguistic features. Only 3 expressed meanings were considered in our statistical analysis because rare features can distort the model, so typicality and loyalty had to be omitted. Inclination was found to be associated with a desire sense of feel as well as animates, agentive physical objects. Whereas quantification was found to especially co-occur with time intervals. For instance, a very Kurt Cobain day, 2017 has been very Kurt Cobain, etc. Comparison is the least restricted of the three express meanings and occurs with a broad array of features. What's important to know is that these express meanings occupy different areas in the biplot. And this is particularly important because it provides additional evidence that these express meanings are indeed distinct. Based on our empirical investigation, we can state that the two models under investigation collectively make a number of correct claims regarding the construction. With regards to express meaning, we observe that comparison is indeed a very common outcome, as per the quantificational hypothesis. However, there are four other express meanings for which this model cannot account. For instance, X is loyal to N is in no way equivalent to X has many properties of N. The distinctiveness of these express meanings is further confirmed by the fact that they tend to cluster with different qualitative and formal features. We also observe that the proper name is highly encyclopedic, serving to activate virtually any well-known fact about Kurt Cobain. What is more, the proper name can be referred to anaphorically and can be substituted for by a pronoun. For instance, very him, where him stands in for Kurt Cobain in context. This finding is congruent with the quantificational hypothesis claim that the construction involves true nouns and noun phrases. However, by positing that the degree device involved in this construction is a quantifier rather than a scalar device, the quantificational hypothesis suggests that we should perceive a difference in meaning between the very in a very depressing song and the very in a very Kurt Cobain song. That's not the case. We take this as evidence that the degree device involved in this construction is the same one involved in the modification of gradable adjectives. Lastly, per the override hypothesis, metonymy is indeed involved, namely in the selection of relevant nodes from the proper names encyclopedic network. However, metonymy does not explain how the degree device and the proper name interact, as the selected nodes are often not gradable at all, as we're evoking, for instance, ideas regarding glasses and plaid shirts. To sum up, the overall picture we have arrived at is the following. The degree device is scalar. That is to say, it's the same device found with gradable adjectives. The proper name is indeed a noun and is highly encyclopedic. The construction participates in no less than 5 different types of expressed meanings. We propose that these expressed meanings are generated via the process of pragmatic enrichment. A meaningful, contextually appropriate gradable scale is added to the overall message conveyed. This scale could be one of loyalty or one of comparison, for instance. It is this pragmatically supplied scale that is intensified rather than the noun itself or a gradable property associated with its referent. Unlike other processes that have been proposed to date, such as quantification or override, enrichment is capable of accounting for the complete range of express meanings observed in our corpus. By way of conclusion, we would argue that our investigation of this particular construction illustrates a few important points that apply to language science more broadly. Firstly, it illustrates the importance of hypothesis testing, an activity that is currently disfavored in cognitively oriented language science compared to hypothesis formulation. Hypothesis testing is important because we can thereby avoid needless model proliferation and dead-end interpretations. Secondly, our study illustrates that even empirically inadequate models contribute to our understanding of a phenomenon. Not all parts of an empirically inadequate model are necessarily wrong. What is more, inaccurate models help generate new phenomena and ideas when confronted with data. Lastly, and perhaps most importantly, our study illustrates the importance of developing data-driven models. If we are to attempt to model the human capacity for language, our models must be built on ample data so that we can account for a phenomenon's complete range of behaviors. We hope you've enjoyed this presentation into what we think is a fascinating linguistic construction, and we look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabriel, thank you very much. This was a very, very fascinating presentation. I was trying to find a proper name to describe it, like a very something presentation, but I have to think about it. So questions from the floor. Yeah, we do have a question here. So the question is from Laurel, our vice president, and the question is this the same phenomenon as so name? For example, That's So Raven, the title of a TV show.
Yes. So would be classified as a degree adverb, and it's one of the degree adverbs that can participate in this construction. So Paris Hilton, so Paris, etc. And of course, there are other degree adverbs that also participate, very, rather, etc. So it's one of the, forgive my voice, I apologize, I'm a bit hoarse. It's so would be one of the degree adverbs amongst others that participates.
Okay, thank you. There's another question from Wang Feng. Can you specify how you compose the corpus and how you studied it in detail?
Your voice is so Tom Waits. I don't know what that means. Going back to the question regarding the corpus, could they be a little bit more specific? What exactly they're wondering about? Like, is it a question of how we gathered the data?
Yeah, I think so. So how you compose the corpus and how you studied it in detail, I guess, yeah, it's about that.
Okay, so the data was extracted from Twitter and the Google search engine using the advanced search features. It was then put into an Excel file, at which point it was processed for gettability. That is to say, our ability to make sense of what is being said. And there we relied on linguistic clues, but also extra linguistic clues, such as, for instance, photos that might have been in the tweets or that might have been in the article that would help us make sense of what was being said. And from there, so you have all of your data in one column, and then we would annotate it for linguistic features, such as what is the type of the subject. So for instance, he looks very Kurt Cobain. He refers to an animate, and we would put that down as an agentive physical object using the Dolce ontology. Another feature that we coded for was the verb. So he looks, we would just put the lemmatized form of the verb, look. Yeah. So what we were primarily analyzing for, features like the type of the ontological type of the subject, whether it was grammatically expressed or not, and the verb, lemmatized form of the verb, we were putting these types of features in association with expressed meaning. What was being expressed overall by the statement? Is it a comparison statement? Are we comparing somebody to Kurt Cobain? He looks very Kurt Cobain. Or were we associating the subject with Kurt Cobain? For instance, an example that we saw, flannel is very Kurt Cobain. There, we're not comparing flannel to Kurt Cobain at all. We're simply suggesting that there's an association between flannel and Kurt Cobain. Or is there are we expressing loyalty? Is the subject saying that they're loyal to Kurt Cobain? So we're looking at associations between expressed meanings with other features, the ontological type of the subject, and, for instance, the type of verb that occurs in context.
Thank you.
That's where we got our results.
Okay. There's a last question, I guess. We have like a couple of minutes left. And the last question is this a recent phenomenon? Do you know when it first became widely used?
Oh, so this is an excellent question. Most of the existing literature describes it as an emerging construction, and some articles go so far as to say that this has only very recently emerged. My impression is that it started to become much more popular in the 1980s and 1990s, We can go as far back in the 1990s in American English using COCA data, the Corpus of Contemporary American English. However, I can also tell you that it goes much further back than that. I have an example from the 18th century in British English. However, it's only in the last few decades that it's really become much more frequent.
Okay, and what is the example from British English? Do you remember that?
I do. It is very John Trott not to have traveled abroad.
Okay.
And John Trott was somebody who had fought in the English Civil War and who was not remembered very kindly by the victors. So there's some very negative connotations there that we've lost to history, but there you go.
Thank you.
And that dates from 1837.